John stood frozen as the store manager's voice cut through the air, sharp and unforgiving. "Dogs aren't allowed here." Rex, his calm service dog, sat silently, his lifeline suddenly deemed a threat. The crowd's eyes burned into him, judgment heavy like a storm about to break. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. John Miller had always been a man of discipline and pride, traits honed over 2 decades of military service. The scars he carried were not all visible. The weight of trauma and the unpredictable shadows of PTSD haunted his every step. Rex, his golden Labrador, was more than a companion. He was the steady anchor that kept John tethered to reality when the world threatened to spiral out of control. Together they had navigated countless silent battles, Rex's calm presence a balm during John's darkest moments. On that crisp Saturday morning, John had set out with a quiet sense of purpose. The grocery list was modest, a few essentials to keep his small household running. The routine of everyday life was a fragile thread he clung to, a way to stave off the chaos that lingered beneath the surface. Entering the supermarket, John was confident. He had brought Rex countless times before without incident. The dog's demeanor was impeccable, trained to behave in public spaces with unwavering patience. But the moment their feet crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. Lisa Harper, the store manager, stood near the entrance with a stern expression that betrayed more than just a concern for rules. Behind her tired eyes was the pressure of looming corporate inspections and mounting fines. Every minor slip-up could mean her job, and today she was on edge. Her gaze locked on Rex, who sat obediently by John's side, tail resting quietly, eyes focused and alert. "Dogs aren't allowed in here," Lisa said sharply, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of shopping carts and murmuring customers. Her stance was rigid, almost confrontational, as if erecting a barrier that John and Rex were not meant to cross. John's voice remained calm, but firm as he replied, "Rex is a service dog. He's certified to assist me with my PTSD and mobility issues." He pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket, carefully unfolding the paperwork that confirmed Rex's official status. "Here are the documents. He's trained and registered." But Lisa's face hardened, irritation flickering in her eyes. "I don't care what kind of service dog you say he is," she snapped, stepping closer with a dismissive wave. "This is a grocery store, and it's a health risk. I'm telling you, he needs to leave now, or I'll have to call security." A sudden hush seemed to ripple through the store. John could feel the weight of dozens of eyes silently judging, some curious, others wary. His chest tightened. The familiar surge of anxiety clawed at him, threatening to unspool the calm he had worked so hard to maintain. Yet he stood his ground, dignity tempered by a simmering frustration. "This is harassment," John said quietly, his voice steady but filled with quiet pain. The humiliation was palpable, an invisible wound inflicted by prejudice and misunderstanding. Lisa's sneer only deepened as she turned sharply and reached for her phone. "Security is on its way," she called out loud enough for the front aisles to hear. Rex shifted slightly, sensing the tension, but remained composed, his eyes never leaving John's face. John clenched his jaw, the sting of being doubted and publicly challenged cutting deeper than any physical wound. Here, in a place meant for community and care, he was reduced to a confrontation, a man forced to defend not only his right, but the very lifeline that kept him whole. The store's bright fluorescent lights now felt harsh and accusing, casting long shadows over John's resolve. Each second stretched, thick with anticipation and unspoken questions. How could something so fundamental as his service dog be met with such hostility? The injustice of it echoed louder than the approaching footsteps of security, setting the stage for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the walls of that small supermarket. The moment the video hit the internet, a quiet storm erupted. In just hours, John's painful encounter with Lisa Harper became a digital beacon of injustice, sparking outrage that reverberated far beyond the confines of the small supermarket. The clip was raw, unfiltered tension between a weary veteran and a manager blinded by fear and prejudice. Lisa's sharp words, her refusal to accept Rex's official service dog certification, and the mounting humiliation etched across John's face all played out in stark clarity for millions to see. The online community ignited like a wildfire. Veterans who had walked through their own battles of invisibility and misunderstanding took immediate notice. Disability rights advocates saw the incident not as an isolated moment, but as a glaring example of systemic ignorance and discrimination that still pervaded everyday life. Comments flooded in, messages of solidarity, shared experiences, and calls for justice. Strangers from all walks of life, united by outrage, used their voices to amplify John's plight, refusing to let it fade into the background. John himself was overwhelmed, not by anger, but by a heavy sense of defeat that seeped deep into his bones. Years of military pride and self-reliance felt fragile and vulnerable beneath the weight of public shame. The incident reopened old wounds, dredging memories of invisibility and dismissal that had haunted him long after his uniform was folded away. For the first time in a long while, John questioned if the respect he had fought so hard for could ever truly be reclaimed. The very people he had served and protected seemed far removed from the cold reality he faced in his daily life. Yet, amidst the storm of humiliation, an unexpected ember of hope began to glow. The overwhelming public support shifted the narrative from one of isolation to collective action. The outcry caught the attention of local authorities, triggering official responses that John had not anticipated. The FDA's local office, responsible for enforcing health and safety regulations in food establishments, was thrust into the spotlight by the flood of complaints, many highlighting not just the wrongful confrontation, but also potential lapses in the supermarket's compliance. The supermarket, once bustling with casual shoppers, was abruptly shuttered for inspection. The temporary closure sent ripples through the community. It was more than just a business disruption. It was a signal that the facade of normalcy had cracked under scrutiny. The investigation uncovered a series of overlooked violations: uncleaned refrigeration units, improperly stored perishables, and lapses in sanitation protocols. These issues, previously unnoticed or ignored, now took center stage, exposing the deeper negligence lurking behind Lisa Harper's anxious enforcement of rules. For John, this unexpected development brought a cautious sense of vindication. The justice he sought was not simply about reclaiming his dignity, but about illuminating broader truths, about the intersections of prejudice, fear, and systemic failure. The spotlight on the store was a tangible reminder that public pressure could compel accountability, that voices raised in unity could dismantle walls of silence and ignorance. Still, the path ahead was uncertain. John's wounds were raw, and the memory of Lisa's harsh words lingered like a shadow. Yet the swelling chorus of support, the veterans rallying in solidarity, the advocates demanding change, the community standing behind him, offered a lifeline. It was a promise that he was not alone, that the fight was bigger than one man and one dog. The pain of public shaming was profound, but in its aftermath, a fragile hope began to take root, a hope that respect, recognition, and justice might one day prevail in a world too often quick to judge and too slow to understand. The FDA's investigation was relentless, peeling back layers of neglect hidden beneath the supermarket's polished facade. Inspectors documented a litany of violations that stretched far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Counters slick with grime, produce spoiled and discarded improperly, meat stored at dangerous temperatures, and cleaning logs that were either falsified or completely absent. The severity of these breaches stunned the community. This was no isolated lapse. It was a systemic failure endangering public health. The store's abrupt closure struck at the heart of a neighborhood that had long relied on its convenience. But the shockwaves ran deeper than economics. They exposed a culture of complacency and mismanagement under Lisa Harper's watch. Her previously unseen negligence now stood under a brutal spotlight, compounded by her earlier disgraceful treatment of John Miller. What had initially seemed like a simple, if painful, clash over Rex's right to be there had morphed into a wider indictment of leadership failure and disregard for both health standards and human dignity. Lisa's conduct was dissected in local media and community forums alike. The public's fury was twofold, both over her blatant discrimination against a disabled veteran and the dangerous environment she had allowed to fester under her supervision. Town meetings became arenas for vocal calls demanding accountability. The consensus was clear. Lisa Harper could not remain in a position of authority unchecked. She was swiftly reassigned away from the store and subjected to mandatory sensitivity and disability awareness training, a public gesture of accountability that underscored the gravity of her misconduct. Meanwhile, John's life had shifted in ways he hadn't foreseen. The same viral exposure that had brought him pain now opened doors. He was invited to speak at a prominent veterans gathering, a platform from which his voice resonated with clarity and power. There, John recounted his ordeal, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a rallying cry for change. His words cut through the room, the importance of recognizing service animals not just as companions, but as lifelines, the urgent need for robust protections enshrined in law, and the profound respect owed to those who had served their country and returned with invisible wounds. The community, galvanized by John's courage and the clear evidence of systemic failure at the supermarket, coalesced around efforts to improve local policy. Petitions circulated demanding explicit legal safeguards for service animals and harsher penalties for discriminatory actions. Local lawmakers, spurred by constituent pressure and media scrutiny, began drafting proposals aimed at tightening enforcement of disability rights and food safety regulations alike. When the supermarket finally reopened, it was under new management, an administration committed not only to rectifying past errors, but also to fostering an environment of respect and inclusivity. Signage was installed prominently throughout the store, clearly affirming the rights of service animals and emphasizing zero tolerance for discrimination. Staff received comprehensive training on disability accommodation and customer service, embedding a culture of empathy into daily operations. Veterans and their service animals were welcomed without question, a stark reversal from the hostility that had once defined the store's atmosphere. John's personal struggle, marked by humiliation and doubt, had blossomed into something far greater, a beacon illuminating the path toward justice and community empowerment. His ordeal was a powerful reminder that standing up against injustice, no matter how daunting, could precipitate real change. The ripple effect of his courage inspired neighbors, veterans, and advocates alike, uniting them in a shared mission to build a more compassionate and equitable society. Through his resilience, John transformed pain into purpose, turning a moment of profound injustice into a catalyst for hope and progress that would resonate far beyond the aisles of one small supermarket.